Bank of England holds rates at 4%, slows quantitative tightening. Trump and Starmer seal major deal. And Nvidia invests $5 billion in Intel forms AI chip alliance. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin. We start off with Europe, where the Bank of England has kept interest rates unchanged at 4% and slowed the pace of its quantitative tightening program. Policymakers voted 7-2 to cut annual gilt sales from 100 to 70 billion pounds, aiming to ease pressure on volatile bond markets. It's the first slowdown since the bank began unwinding its gift holding in 2022 after more than £875 billion in purchases to support the economy. The committee also confirmed inflation is expected to peak at 4% this month before gradually returning to its 2% target by 2027. The UK government has announced it has secured £150 billion in US investments, which it hopes will create 7,600 jobs. The deal, hailed by the government as the largest ever secured during such a visit, is set to create 7,600 jobs and strengthen economic ties. The investment is heavily focused on the technological sector, with major commitments including Blackstone's pledge of £90 billion over the next decade. Microsoft's £22 billion commitment to build what will be Britain's largest AI supercomputer, and Google's £5 billion investment to expand a data centre.
You personify an important part of the unique national bond and really a world bond. What you've done is incredible.
Example of that. But it also comes down to business, to all of you.
So we're taking the next logical step with a historic agreement on science and technology partnerships, and this will create new government, academic, and private sector cooperation in areas such as AI, which is taking over the world. I'm looking at you guys. Here a number of years ago, but somehow today it looks even better, even more beautiful, and even more historic. The ties.
US President Donald Trump has concluded his visit to the UK, signing a tech prosperity deal with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The agreement is set to bring thousands of jobs and billions of US investments into the UK's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and nuclear energy sectors. The investments include over $42 billion in the AI sector, with Microsoft alone committing a record $30 billion to build what it will be Britain's largest supercomputer. The deal also establishes a UK arm of the Trump-backed Stargate AI infrastructure project. The leaders also discussed trade and foreign policy, though talks on slashing US tariffs on British steel and aluminum remain stalled. For more analysis, we're joined from Paris by the director of the EU ASEAN Centre, Nicholas Frizzelli. Thank you, sir, for joining us again on the Economic Bulletin. Sir, let's start off by asking you, now the government has announced £150 billion investment packages that is set to create 7,600 jobs. How do you see this ratio when it comes to economic perspectives, and what does it suggest about the nature of these investments, especially in a sector like technology and AI?
Delighted to join you today. I think it's an important meeting. I think the economic, R&D, industrial, and financial impact of that meeting today will be felt for many years because there is a multiplier effect. So what is, to make a long story short, what is a multiplier effect is the idea that if you go to Oxford and Cambridge, and if you bring in, Silicon Valley giants like, Microsoft, for example, or Cisco, and around Oxford and Cambridge, there are clusters of high-tech AI startups, which are usually staffed by the best professors and the best researchers from the best universities in Europe, which are in England. What happens is if you spend $1 in R&D money, so if the Americans and the Brits together spend $1 in R&D money, hopefully 2-3 years later, it can generate $9 or $10 or $15 in economic growth, in additional economic growth for both these gigantic American tech companies and for the UK economy. So it's really good. Something else I want to say, something very new is happening. In the old days, and the old days, ended 8 months ago, right? So when President Trump entered the White House in February of this year, the world changed dramatically. In the old days, American tech companies and American presidents, they favored Dublin, the capital of Ireland, Ireland, which is a part of the European Union, right?
Yes, Google was based there, wasn't it?
Exactly. And so what happened, even in the first Trump presidency, Trump didn't dare shake the boat. So he didn't dare, challenge the American love affair with Dublin for many reasons. One of them, of course, is taxes. They had a sweet tax deal, and they used Ireland as a beachhead to conquer Europe and pay less taxes in France and Germany, blah, blah, blah. But now Trump is upping the ante. So what he's doing is not only good for England, Britain, and America, it's bad for Ireland, and it's very bad for Europe. And he couldn't care less. So really, we're seeing an assertive, a self-assured, assertive Trump at the moment where Keir Starmer is weak. So in the past, 3-4 weeks, Keir Starmer was marred in a series of political scandals which have spiraled out of control. One of the scandals, the main one, was linked to America because his former ambassador to Washington was fired 5 days ago under pressure from the Americans. So all that is happening at the moment where, the left wing of the Labour Party is pressuring Keir Starmer.
But this was the deal, wasn't it? I mean, like Trump's first term, he basically told the British that if you go ahead with Brexit, we're going to, throw money your way.
Yes, that's a very good remark. That's an excellent remark because people forget about the time frame. And so many cruel ironies are happening at the same time today. And here it's a notion, we see in the works of Greek historians like Herodotus or Arab historian like Ibn Khaldun, the acceleration of history. So sometimes in just 2-3 days, things can happen which never happened in the previous 50 years. So really, it is an acceleration of history. You are absolutely right, because when the Brexit vote happened in June 2016, back then, people thought, people in Europe, Germany, France, America, they thought first that the Brexit vote would never win. So the consensus, even among American experts, was that it would fail. So when the Brexit vote in June 2016, when the result of the vote was that most Brits wanted out of the EU, it was a big shock for everyone. But something more shocking happened after, is the British, the Conservative Party, the prime ministers who ruled England, they completely failed in the post-Brexit vote negotiation with the EU. So at every turn of the post-Brexit negotiations, the EU Commission and the French and the Germans, they fooled the Brits, and the Brits made many, many mistakes. And so, Brexit only happened 4 or 5 years after the vote. And it happened in a bizarre way, because it happened with little consequence for UK trade UK growth, UK economy, and UK independence from Europe. So you could say that Brexit was a failure, right? And so what Trump is doing today, he's turning that British failure called Brexit into a success for America. So that is very smart of him. It shows also that he's a great maneuverer. He senses the weakness of the British. He also senses the anxieties of the Europeans. He hits precisely where it hurts.
Well, also, like a large portion of the announced, sums that are going to be invested are in $90 billion to be exact, from Blackstone, comes from a private equity firm. Now, how does this type of commitment differ from economically from a direct capital investment? And what are the potential risks here or benefits for the UK economy? Like you said, the UK right now is under an immense amount of pressure.
You're right also. What's fascinating in the live press conference, which I think ended just 15, 20 minutes ago, right, at 10 Downing Street, both Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, they repeated three words all the time. And I think it's not a coincidence. They repeated the word investment, the word tech, AI, and the word infrastructure. So blah, 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 infrastructure, money, investment, blah, 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 tech. So really what we're seeing here with BlackRock being a world leader, one of the world leaders in the field of private equity and infrastructure investment. So here there's the idea that there's a new Cold War pitting America against China. In that new Cold War, once again, the age of geoeconomics, the key word here is not economics, it's geography. In that new era, infrastructure investment will play a key role. Tech infrastructure investment, including AI tech, will be essential because of the multiplier effect, etc. And so, there's the idea that America now will work in the way, the Germans worked 100 years ago in the years 1900s, 1910, which is a cooperation, a deep cooperation between a central government, a nationalist central government, and big capital, big companies. And that's exactly what Trump is doing. He's saying, I'm the central national government. I'm going to steer the money from the Silicon Valley in California and Wall Street in New York, and I will steer it in a way which is beneficial for us, to make money, but also beneficial in the new Cold War against China. And London for him is a prime target. One last remark, because in that new era, the age of geoeconomics, there's a concept which I modestly invented called the rules of geoeconomic gravity. So what does it mean, the rules of geoeconomic gravity? It's like big planets, right? So America is a big planet, and now Trump is attracting London, the city of London, away from Europe, which he thinks is irrelevant, attracting it into the orbit of America. Yes. And that's very smart. It's cynical, so it's very brutal, very cynical, but it's very smart.
As it is always with Trump. Now, as you said, the main focus or the main talking points that they discussed is basically tech infrastructure investment. And as the UK celebrates these deals, which are also very important, they're also simultaneously facing a pullback of investments from major pharmaceutical companies and a decline in the domestic employment. What does this conflicting data suggest about the overall health and the future direction of the British economy? Are they going to be further dependent on the US, or will they have a mix in the bag?
So clearly, they made their choice here, and there's another cruel irony. Why cruel and ironic? Because Keir Starmer himself is a human rights lawyer, so he's very pro-European. When he was a young student, he was an extremely sort of left-wing, pro-EU activist, a human rights lawyer. He wanted nothing to do with business, dirty, big business, blah, blah, blah. And here we are today. The Prime Minister implementing Brexit aggressively, the Prime Minister moving away from the EU and into America's arms is precisely poor Keir Starmer, the former pro-EU, Europhile, human rights lawyer. So another cruel irony. I think, honestly, if all industries die, so if you have an old-fashioned, say, aspirin factory in Manchester, right, or an old-fashioned antibiotics factory in Liverpool, it's not the future of the UK economy because these are 1950s, 1960s factories. So if they close, it's no big deal. However, if you have trillions of dollars coming from the Silicon Valley and Wall Street into London, the city of London, Oxford and Cambridge, that is amazing because it will give a long-term boost to the UK economy. And the price to pay, which is moving a little further into America's orbit, quite honestly, today is not a big price. Why is it not a big price today? Because the German and the French economy are slowing down. And so you don't want to move to the orbit of a planet which is collapsing, right? You want to move into the orbit of a successful planet.
That is true. But also there are talks on like steel and aluminum tariffs, and that they've stalled basically despite the new investment announcements. What is the economic significance of this failure, and how does this potentially undermine the broader tech prosperity deal and the UK's relationship with the key traditional industries? Do you think that this is going to, keep the UK government hesitant towards making major, steps?
Yes, you're also putting your finger on a remarkable issue, very important, because it's all good to invest trillions in AI infrastructure, tech infrastructure, the industries of the future, beautiful. It's not important if you close textile factories in Manchester or aspiries in Scotland. Not important. However, steel and aluminium are important. And here, Keir Starmer, the British government, should be very careful for long-term strategic national interest reasons. One of them defense, one of them is the defense industry, but not only. Having at least a few steel mills and aluminium mills on your national soil is important as a marker of national independence. But there's something else. Now, the Conservative Party is declining. Keir Starmer's own party, according to the latest opinion poll, the Labour Party, is collapsing amongst UK voters. One party is rising in Britain today. It's Nigel Farage's party, which is a right-wing populist nationalist party, Reform, right? And that party, Nigel Farage, one of the very smart things he did in the past 6 months, he surprised everyone by backing left-wing trade union leaders defending their steel mill, their steel factory in England. Very smart, because he figured out that even as a right-winger, as a free market capitalist populist, he understood that having one big steel mill in Britain was important for national independence, and he backed these left-wing union leaders who are traditionally pro-labor, and they felt betrayed by Keir Starmer. So there's a lot of political symbolism. If Keir Starmer agrees to close the last big steel mill in England in the coming week, it will be a disaster for him.
He needs to balance things out, basically.
Yes. Politically, he will pay a high price too.
Okay, thank you so much. From Paris, that was the director of the EU ASEAN Centre, Nicholas Vazzetti. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for joining us here. Now, developments from the rest of the world. The International Monetary Fund has announced that its managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, has proposed the appointment of Dan Katz as the fund's first deputy managing director. Katz's appointment is set to become effective on October 6, 2025, pending the IMF's executive board approval. Katz, who currently serves as the chief of staff of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, is the principal U.S. appointment person on China and has been a central figure in international negotiations. According to the IMF statement, Katz's experience at the intersection of economic policy and international relations, along with his solution-oriented approach, makes him a strong fit for the role. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated on Thursday that Russia is deliberately slowing its economic growth to suppress inflation, asserting that the country is far away from a recession. The comments come as data of Russia's central bank showed 2 consecutive quarters of decline in gross domestic product, a common definition of a technical recession. Despite facing over 25,000 sanctions imposed by the US, Europe, and their allies, Russia's economy, fueled by the war spending, grew at a 4.1% rate in 2023 and 4.3% in 2024, far outpacing G7 countries.
В принципе, и мы так делаем. Здесь важно не переборщить, аккуратненько. Но в целом, когда люди видят, что их средства так окрашены, идут на конкретное благородное.
The People's Bank of China left its key 7-day reverse repo rate unchanged at 1.4% on Thursday, signaling no rush to ease policy despite the US Federal Reserve cutting rates just hours earlier. The central bank injected nearly 490 billion yuan into the system through open market operations. But analysts say resilient exports and a strong stock market rally have allowed Beijing to hold back on fresh stimulus. The Shanghai Composite is trading near a 10-year high, while annual growth remains on track for the government around 5% target. Customs data has shown that China's exports of rare earth products jumped to their highest level on record in August. Shipments of the minerals totaled at 5,792 tons in August, down from 5,994 tons in July. Despite the monthly dip, exports were up at 14.5% for the year, reflecting an overall strong demand. The data's release came just ahead of a planned call between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump. Rare earth minerals, which are crucial for producing high-tech goods like electric vehicles and defense equipment, have become a key point in ongoing trade disputes. Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Yadong urged the European Union not to groundlessly characterize Chinese cars as merely good value for money. He stated that EU automakers are capable of adapting to market competition and that protectionism cannot stop powerful market forces. The comments come as the EU has imposed tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, which it claims are unfairly subsidized. China has responded by launching its own investigations into certain EU imports and has appealed to the World Trade Organization. In Oceania, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has reported that employment fell by 5,400 in August, with nearly 41,000 full-time jobs lost. They reversed a strong gain in July and came well below the forecast for a 21,500 rise. The unemployment rate, however, held steady at 4.2%, while the participation rate slipped to 66.8%. Hours worked also declined after rising in July. Analysts say the figures point to a cooling jobs market, but not enough to force the Reserve Bank of Australia into immediate action. Markets still expect rates to hold this month, with a possible cut in November. The Australian dollar slipped to 66 cents on US cents on the release. Statistics New Zealand has reported the economy shrank by 0.9% in the second quarter, far worse than forecasts for a 0.3% fall. Annual GDP dropped 0.6%, with weakness seen across construction, manufacturing, and services. The data has raised expectations of a sharper rate cut from the Reserve Bank of New Zealand next month. Markets are now pricing a 50 basis point move in October, with further easing likely in November. Finance Minister Nicola Willis said global turmoil and U.S. tariffs have weighed on investment decisions, but early signs point to a modest recovery in the third quarter. The number of Americans filing new applications for unemployment benefits fell last week, with initial claims dropping 33,000 to 231,000 for the week ending September 13th. The Labor Department noted that the decline partially reversed a prior surge linked to identity fraud attempts in Texas. Despite the fall, economists note that the labor market has softened, with both hiring demand and labor supply shrinking. The unemployment rate is now near a 4-year high of 4.3%. The Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark interest rate for the first time since December to the 4% to 4.25% range. Following the decision, Fed Chair Jerome Powell asserted that the body was strongly committed to its independence, a comment that comes amid political pressures from the Trump administration. The Fed's new economic projections still show inflation above the 2% target.
So we did welcome a new committee member today, as we always do, and the committee remains united in pursuing our dual mandate goals. We're strongly committed to maintaining our independence, and beyond that, I really don't have anything to share. We have begun to see goods prices showing through into higher inflation, and actually the increase in goods prices accounts for most of the increase in inflation, or perhaps all of the increase in inflation over the course of this year. Those are not very large effects at this point, and we do expect them to continue to build over the course of the rest of the year and the next year. And it's also possible that there may be effects on employment, but that I would say if you're looking at why employment is doing what it's doing, that's much more about the change in immigration. So the supply of workers has obviously come way down. There's very little growth, if any, in the supply of workers. And at the same time, demand for workers has also come down quite sharply, and to the point where we see what I've called a curious balance. It's, typically when we say things are in balance, that sounds good, but in this case, the balance is because both supply and demand have come down quite sharply. Now demand coming down a little more sharply because we now see the unemployment rate edging up.
NVIDIA has said that it will invest $5 billion in Intel instantly, becoming one of the U.S. chipmaker's largest shareholders with a roughly 4% stake. The deal comes just weeks after Washington engineered an extraordinary agreement for the U.S. government to take a 10% stake in Intel. Shares of Intel surged 30% in pre-market trading. Under the pact, Intel and NVIDIA will jointly develop PC and data center chips, though NVIDIA will not use Intel's foundry services. Instead, the company will focus on new speedy link technology that connects the CPUs with NVIDIA's GPUs, a move analysts say could challenge AMD and Broadcom in the AI server market. NVIDIA shares rose more than 3%, while AMD slipped nearly 4% and TSMC lost 2%. Oil prices were little changed on Thursday as traders weighed the start of looser monetary policy after the U.S. Federal Reserve cut interest rates against concerns about the U.S. economy. Brent crude futures rose 0.3% to $68.18 a barrel. while the U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 0.4% to $64.28. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Bank of England holds rates at 4%, slows quantitative tightening. Trump and Starmer seal major tech deal. And Nvidia invests $5 billion in Intel, forms AI chip alliance. This concludes our economic bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at the handle @QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more.